Once again, Christian greetings to all our valued listeners and viewers throughout the whole world, more particularly to all Shepherd's Rod believers, and most especially to our beloved brothers and sisters in the United States of America. Special greetings to our brethren in Colorado, to our brethren in Georgia, and to our brethren in Fiji Island, Mexico, Spain, in Africa, to the United Kingdom, and also to our brethren in Australia, and to the rest of the 144,000 living saints scattered abroad. Greetings. May the good Lord bless you, brothers and sisters. This is our episode number 4 on the subject, what is the top of Carmel? Is it withered? And of course, our K-text is Amos Chapter 1, verses 1 and verse 2. And at this time, let us focus our attention to the earthquake mentioned on verse 1. So let us read. It says, "The words of Amos, who was among the herdmen of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam the son of Joash king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake." Historically, there is no specific, definite evidence that there was an earthquake historically in the reign of King Uzziah, the 10th king of Judah, from 808 BC to 756 BC. And it is closely connected to Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1, saying, "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple." Some historian says that it might be 2 years, or the earthquake occurred 2 years before King Uzziah died, the 10th king of Judah. And Isaiah 6 verse 1, at the very year when King Uzziah died, that is the time that God showed the vision to prophet Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 6, which is a very remarkable prophecy, which is closely connected to the vision of Ezekiel on Ezekiel chapter 1. And let us try our best that we could connect one subject to the other. The Bible would not mention the death of King Uzziah if there is no close connection to the vision that was shown by God to prophet Isaiah on Isaiah chapter 6. The mere fact that in that vision, it was attached the year by which King Uzziah died, such historical event, there must be a truth behind that historical event that will give light and more clearer understanding concerning the fulfillment of Isaiah chapter 6, which is also connected to Amos chapter 1, verse 1. The earthquake mentioned in Amos chapter 1 on verse 1. Let us read again. "The words of Amos, who was among the herdmen of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, in the days of Jeroboam the son of Joash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake." As I've said, there is no definite historical event that there was earthquake in the reign of King Uzziah, the 10th king of Judah, from 808 BC to 756 BC. He reigned 52 years in the kingdom of Judah, according to 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 13. 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 13. And this verse in Amos chapter 1, verse 1, has a close connection to the prophecy of Zechariah chapter 14 on verse 5. So let us read Zechariah 14, verse 5. "And ye shall flee to the valley of the mountains. For the valley of the mountains shall reach unto Azal. Ye shall flee like as ye fled from before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. And the Lord my God shall come, and all the saints with thee. It is very important, brothers and sisters, because it is closely connected to the prophecy in Zechariah 14, verse 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The first 5 verses is a consecutive event. And here we can clearly see that the earthquake in Zechariah 14 verse 1, Zechariah 14 verse 5, is the same earthquake mentioned in Amos Chapter 1 verse 1. But Isaiah chapter 6 is also closely connected because it points out to King Uzziah, the 10th king of Judah, by which such vision of Isaiah chapter 6 is prophetic. So, we need to connect one subject to the other. To repeat again, Zechariah 14, verse 1, 2, and 3 is pointing to according to 2TG, the bloodiest conflict that will ever happen. So, let's read here in 2TG 41, page 18. It says, just how this is to come about, I do not know. But I do know that the greatest of all wars is to be fought about the Holy Land. Behold, says the Lord, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. And the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the woman ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Zechariah 14, verse 1 and 2. And in 1TG, number 19, so let's read the statement. In 1TG number 19, page 3 and 4. It says, in view of the fact that Jerusalem is to be protected by a wall of fire, Zechariah 2 verse 5, while the house of Judah reigns there, it is definite that the battle here described in Zechariah 14 verse 1 and 2 must be fought before the house of Judah is established. In that battle, the nations will defeat the rulers of the promised land. Then it is that the house of Judah commences to be set up. So this prophecy is also closely connected to Luke 21 verse 24 and Revelation 11 verse 2. Now, without any doubts, brothers and sisters, the earthquake mentioned in Zechariah 14 verse 5 and the earthquake mentioned in Amos chapter 1 verse 1 is not a historical event, but rather it is prophetic. And such predicted event is closely connected to Joel 3 verse 16. Why? Because verse 2, in Amos 1 verse 2, it says, and he said, the Lord will roar from Zion, and utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the habitations of the shepherds shall mourn, and the top of Carmel shall wither. So this predicted event that the Lord will roar from Zion is pointing to the same event in Joel 3 verse 16, saying, the Lord also shall roar out of Zion. What is the difference in Joel 3 verse 16 and Amos 1 verse 2? The difference is that the preposition used in Joel 3:16 is out of Zion. But in Amos 1 verse 2, the preposition used is roar from Zion. Now let us read Joel 3 verse 16. It says, the Lord also shall roar out of Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth shall shake, but the Lord will be the hope of his people and the strength of the children of Israel. So let us focus our attention first to Joel 3 verse 16. Now I would like to read first 1TG 5 page 11 and then 2TG number 8 page 26. 1TG number 5 page 11. It is A very wonderful prophecy, brethren. And if we could be able to ascertain clearly this prophetic event, the definite time, then it would enlighten our understanding to the rest of the subject concerning Amos 1, verse 1 and 2, in connection with Micah 7, verse 14 and verse 15. So let us read 1TG number 5, page 11 and page 12. It says, "Put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, get you down, for the press is full. The pots overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision. For the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision." Remember, it is closely connected to Zechariah 14. Verse 5, mention also the great valley. "The sun and the moon shall be darkened, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. The Lord also shall roar out of Zion, and utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth shall shake. But the Lord will be the hope of his people, and the strength of the children of Israel." Jubel 3, verse 13 to 16. "It is the time in which shall be said," it says, "it is the time in which shall be said, the sinners in Zion are afraid. Fearfulness hath surprised the hypocrites. Who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire? Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings? He that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly. He that despiseth the gain of oppression, that shaketh his hands from holding of bribes, that stoppeth his ears from hearing of blood, and shutteth his eyes from seeing evil. He shall dwell on high. His place of defense shall be the munitions of rocks. Bread shall be given him. His waters shall be sure. And the inhabitant shall not say, I am sick. The people that dwell therein shall be forgiven their iniquity. The sinners in Zion are first to cry to the rocks and to the mountains. Then will the proclamation of the great and dreadful day of the Lord go forth far and wide, saying, Hear ye that are far off, what I have done, and ye that are near, acknowledge my might. Isaiah 33, verse 13. The shepherd's rod declared clearly that it is the sinners in Zion are the very first one to cry to the rocks and to the mountains. It reminds us that words in 2SR, page 101, it says, page 100 and 101. If God's ideal is to bless the world through the medium of His church on earth, and they to whom the gospel for the world is committed have left the sheep and are serving the devil in the person of themselves, where is the hope of the world? The only answer that can be given is, woe to the sinners in Zion. God will gather His sheep. He will have a church. 2SR page 100 and 101. Why is it that the only answer that can be given is, woe to the sinners in Zion? And then it says, God will gather His sheep. There are two things revealed in that passage. First, that sinners in Zion, they are the very ones that scattered the sheep. Second, some of the sheep under their control, they are the one who hold God's people in bondage, in ignorance of timely truth. The voice of inspiration says in 1TG 45 on page 20 that shepherds are slain because they have kept the sheep away from the Lord's green pasture, present truth. 1TG 45 page 20. All of them who hinder God's message, the present truth, they will be slain, brothers and sisters. What is Zion? Headquarters. I would like to read White House Recruiter on page 53. It says here, White House Recruiter, page 53. And it shall come to pass that he that is left in Zion at headquarters. Zion represent headquarters, Woe to the sinners in Zion, those who keep God's people in darkness, in bondage. In answerer number 4, page 22 and page 23, it is concerning Isaiah 63 verse 3. We explained several times that the 144,000 living saints, they are those who escape the ruin on Isaiah 59 and Isaiah 63. 1 SR 153, it says, with the 144,000, those who escape the ruin of Isaiah 59 and 63. What is Isaiah 59 and Isaiah 63? The specific verse is Isaiah 59 verse 16 and Isaiah 63 verse 5. It is called the Great Apostasy. Only those that escape that great apostasy will be among that special company, the 144,000 living saints. 1 SR 219 and 220. To the prophet Isaiah, this great apostasy, fostered by blind spiritual guides, was revealed, which he describes in the following scriptures. And he saw that there was no man, and wondered that there was no intercessor. Therefore, his arm brought salvation unto him, and his righteousness it sustained him. Isaiah 59:16. And I looked, and there was none to help, and I wondered that there was none to uphold. Therefore mine own arm brought salvation unto me, and my fury it upheld me. Isaiah 63 verse 5. Micah, looking forward to this wholesale deception, says, trust ye not in a friend, put ye not confidence in a guide. So the shepherd's rod made it so plain that Isaiah 59:16 and Isaiah 63 verse 5 is the great apostasy, also called as wholesale deception. Micah 7 verse 5. And the 144,000, they are those who escape that great deception. Those who escape that great apostasy. They are those who escape that wholesale deception. I would like to read answerer number 4, page 22 and page 23. The first part of the verse applied to the first advent of Christ, and the last part to the time of the purification of the church. That whoever continues to hold his people in bondage and in ignorance of his truth. What truth? Montigi 45:20. That servants are slain because they keep God's people away from God's green pastures, the present truth. That whoever continues to hold his people in bondage and in ignorance of his truth, will he tread in his anger and trample them in his fury and sprinkle their blood upon his garments, thereby staining all his raiment and thus setting his people free. Answerer number 4, page 22 and page 23. Now let us go back to our subject. Amos chapter 1, verse 1 and verse 2. But we focus our attention to that statement 2 years before the earthquake. By which these 2 years, brothers and sisters, before the earthquake, meaning that is the time, brothers and sisters, that God is sending antitypical Elijah the Tishbite to give warning to the people 2 years before the earthquake, by which that earthquake is not really literal, although it is also literal. But for sure, it is even more pointing to that predicted event, the earthquake mentioned in the book of Revelation. Right? It is closely connected, brothers and sisters. Amos 1 verse 1 and 2, Isaiah chapter 6, Joel 3:16, Zechariah 14 verse 5. Now, the voice of inspiration says that it is the sinners in Zion are the first one, the very first one to cry unto the rocks and unto the mountains. Now, I would like to read Patriarchs and Prophets. Patriarchs and Prophets 340 and 341. So let us read, brethren. It says, "Never since man was created had there been witnessed such a manifestation of divine power as when the law was proclaimed from Sinai." So when the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, was proclaimed in Mount Sinai, there was a great earthquake. The earth shook. The heavens also dropped at the presence of God. Even Sinai itself was moved at the presence of God, the God of Israel. Psalm 68 verse 8, "Amid the most terrific convulsions of nature, the voice of God, like a trumpet, was heard from the cloud. The mountain was shaken from base to summit, and the host of Israel, pale and trembling with terror, lay upon their faces upon the earth. He whose voice then shook the earth, he declared, yet once more, I shake not the earth only, but also heaven." Hebrews chapter 12, verse 26, says the scripture, "The Lord shall roar from on high, and utter his voice from his holy habitation, and the heavens and the earth shall shake." Jeremiah 25:30, Joel 3, verse 16. "In the great coming day, the heaven itself shall depart as a scroll when it is rolled together." Revelation 6, verse 14. "And every mountain and island shall be moved out of its place. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard, and shall be removed like a cottage. And the transgression thereof shall be heavy upon it, and it shall fall and not rise again." It says, "Therefore shall all hands be faint, all faces shall be turned into paleness, and every man's heart shall melt, and they shall be afraid. Pangs and sorrow shall take hold of them, and I will punish the world for their evil, saith the Lord. And I will cause the arrogancy of the proud to cease, and will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible." Isaiah 13, verse 7 and 8 and 11. Jeremiah 13, verse 6. "When Moses came from the divine presence in the mount, where he had received the tables of the testimony, guilty Israel could not endure the light that glorified his countenance. How much less can transgressors look upon the Son of God when he shall appear in the glory of his Father, surrounded by all the heavenly hosts, to execute judgment upon the transgressors of his law and the rejecters of his atonement." Those who have disregarded the law of God and trodden underfoot the blood of Christ, the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, shall hide themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and they shall say to the mountains and rocks, "Fall on us and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand?" Revelation 6, verse 15 to verse 17. "In that day, a man shall cast his idols of silver and his idols of gold to the moss and to the bats, to go into the clefts of the rocks and into the tops of the rugged rocks, for fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty, when he ariseth to shake terribly the earth." Isaiah 2, verse 20 and verse 21. Now let us follow the admonition given in answerer number 5 on page 56. "Teach only in the light of the rod those passages which in one way or another need to be interpreted. Thus only will all present truth believers ever become of the same mind, seeing eye to eye and speaking the same things." 1 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 10, 1 Peter chapter 3 verse 8, and Isaiah 52 verse 8. So our reading in Patriarchs and Prophets 340 and 341. We need to study it in the light of the shepherd's rod. But one thing for sure, all of these verses, Hebrews 12:26, Jeremiah 25 verse 30, Joel 3 verse 16, Revelation 6:14, Isaiah 24 verse 20, Isaiah 13 verse 7, 8 and 11, and Jeremiah 30 verse 6, and Revelation 6 verse 15 to 17, and Isaiah 2 verse 20 to 21. All are still unfulfilled prophecies. And we need to study it in the light of the rod. But one of the verse which is closely related to our subject had been mentioned, Joel 3 verse 16. But here in Patriarchs and Prophets 340, it was compared in the days of Moses when there was a great earthquake, when the divine power had been manifested in Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is also a very typological prophecy, because here in 1 Ezra, let's read the statement given by the shepherd's rod. It says here on page, I think, 100, it says Mount Sinai. So it is Mount Sinai. 1 SR page 100. Because the mere fact that the prophet compare not only Sister White but as well as David in Psalm 68 verse 8, the occurrence in Mount Sinai. And also Apostle Paul mentioned that event in Hebrews chapter 12 verse 26. So I would like to read here in 1 SR page 100. It says, Mount Sinai. In the 3rd month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai. And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Exodus 19 verse 1, Exodus 20 verse 1 to 3. Here is where the 140 years ended, beginning with Abraham going out of Ur. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 760. Here is where Moses organized a church when he appointed 70 elders and where God spoke to the people himself. The experience at Sinai is a symbol of reorganization of the church. God himself takes charge of the flock. We read in volume 5, page 80, we have been inclined to think that where there are no faithful ministers, there can be no true Christians, but this is not the case. God has promised that where the shepherds are not true, He will take charge of the flock Himself. God has never made the flock wholly dependent upon human instrumentalities, but the days of purification of the church are hastening on apace. God will have a people pure and true. In the mighty sifting soon to take place, we shall be better able to measure the strength of Israel. So Mount Sinai is typological, brothers and sisters, and it is typifying the predicted reorganization. So we have Mount Sinai, brothers and sisters, but also we have Mount Carmel. So in the last generation of men, when all the prophecies will be fulfilled, God provided us pictures in different angles. Pictures meaning photograph, or in other words, typical representation. We have the typical representation in Isaiah 6, 7 and 8, and also typical representation in the days of Moses. Now, to repeat again, brothers and sisters, in Patriarchs and Prophets 340 and 341, the comparison of that predicted event, Joel 3:16, Hebrews 12:26, Revelation 6 verse 14 to 17, Isaiah 13 verse 7 to 11, Jeremiah 25 verse 30, Jeremiah 30 verse 6, and Isaiah 2 verse 20 and 21, it was compared. The great earthquake of that manifestation of divine power in Mount Sinai. I would like to read to you Desire of Ages, 780. Desire of Ages, page 780. So our subject is focusing to the earthquake. Now, I would like to read Desire of Ages 780. An earthquake marked the hour when Christ laid down his life. So when Jesus Christ says, it is finished, and there was earthquake. Now let us read first the Bible so that we could understand. And the prophet connect that earthquake to Joel 3:16. Now let us read Matthew 27. Matthew 27, verse 50, 51, and 52. Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom. And the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. And the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which sleep arose, and came out of the graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city, and appeared unto many. Now when the centurion and they that were with him watching Jesus saw the earthquake and those things that were done, they feared greatly, saying, truly this was the Son of God. Matthew 27 verse 51, 52, 53, and 54. So let us read again Desire of Ages concerning the earthquake mentioned here. It says, Desire of Ages, page 780. And to repeat again, this is also closely connected to the earthquake mentioned in Revelation, by which the shepherd says in 11 symbolic code number 8, page 3, saying, Judah and the people of God. The question does frequently come to Mount Carmel, since the subject of the 42 months was explained in the symbolic code, asking why the code has never said when the 42 months started and when the great earthquake of Revelation 11 is to take place. So, it says, brothers and sisters, therefore, to help clarify these questions and to emphasize the fact that God has given us sufficient information to know the seasons. God gave us sufficient information to know the seasons. Remember the divine principle in 2SR 221, saying that the revelation is not the prophecy of itself. It is a revelation of the prophecy already recorded in the Old Testament. Therefore, the earthquake mentioned in Revelation 11, verse 13, must be connected to the earthquake recorded in the Old Testament. And Revelation 11, verse 13 is pertaining to the symbolical earthquake because that is under the trumpet study. The last verse under the sixth trumpet, according to track number 5, page 79, that the description of the sixth trumpet begin on Revelation 9, verse 14, and ended on Revelation 11, verse 14. Therefore, Revelation 11, verse 13 is the last verse of the description under the sixth trumpet, right? And it's really closely connected to our subject in Amos Chapter 1, verse 1 and verse 2. For example, I would like to read to you track number 5. Track number 5, page 114, it says, Chapters 10 and 11 of the Revelation covers a series of events different from those of chapter 9. Verse 13, you see, verse 13 of the 11th chapter. So verse 13 of the 11th chapter of Revelation brings us up only to the time of the fulfillment of the marking and slaying of Ezekiel 9 in the church, or to the commencement of the loud cry of the third angel's message. So verse 13 is a prophecy. There are two predicted events on verse 13. What is that? Marking and slaying. Also closely connected to the 40 typical days, right? Because that is also marking and slaying. Now let us read track number 5 on page 112. Track number 5, page 112. Revelation 11, verse 13. And the same hour was there a great earthquake, and the 10th part of the city fell. And in the earthquake were slain of men were 7,000. and the remnant were affrighted and gave glory to the God of heaven. Now, it is also closely connected to Isaiah chapter 6, and we will prove to you because this prophecy closely connected to each other. Amos 1, Joel 3, and Zechariah 14, with those verses that quoted on Patriarchs and Prophets 340 and 341. So let's read again the statement, and I want to be very careful to this subject. Track number 5, 112 and 113. The hour, the earthquake, the 10th part, the city, the 7,000 slain, and the remnant must to maintain the integrity of the inter-trumpet symbolism, therefore themselves be symbolical. Climaxing the event symbolized, the remnant were affrighted and gave glory to the God of heaven. None but those who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ can truly fear and give glory to Him. Accordingly, in the present connection, the remnant is necessarily figurative of the righteous, the with. Who are they, the with? Let's read first, 1SR. 1SR, page 228. It says, the with represents the 144,000. The with represents the 144,000. And it says, accordingly, in the present connection, the remnant is necessarily figurative of the righteous, the with in that part of the city which fell. This makes the 7,000 slain figurative of the unrighteous that tares therein. Hence, the 10th part stands for the church which is first purified, in which the bad, the tares are separated from the good, the with. Obviously, therefore, the rest of the city is in this instance a representation of the rest of the Christian world, Christendom as a whole. But since we already taken many subjects, the Christendom mentioned here as a whole, which is the rest of the city, is pointing to, brothers and sisters, the entire constituents of Sabbath keepers under the banner of the third angel's message. It says, thus the earthquake takes place not throughout Christendom, but throughout the church from which is separated the first fruits, the 144,000. Now, if you will look at the next statement, and since an earthquake is a shaking, then the one in point is figurative of a shaking therein. But the shaking mentioned here is pointing to the period when the 144,000 living saints will be disclosed to view. Because the quotation is Early Writings, page 270. Early Writings, page 270. If you will read 2TG, yes, read in 2TG, I think number 46, on page 39, page 38, and page 39. So I would like to read the statement. It says, hence the reason for the imminent purification of the church, the destruction of the Acans of today, in preparation for the antitypical crossing of the Jordan. Remember, the shepherd says, there is only one group eligible to cross the Jordan River. 1TG7, page 12. It says, what made one group eligible to cross the Jordan River? Indicating that there is only one group which is eligible to cross the Jordan River. 1TG7, page 12. Let's read. It is now to be considered how this work of shaking, separating will begin, and also how the church is to hear of it. Years ago, the Spirit of God opened up the truth in vision. I asked the meaning of the shaking I had seen, declared the recipient of the vision, and was shown that it would be caused by the straight testimony called forth by the counsel of the true witness to the Laodiceans. This will have its effect upon the heart of the receiver and will lead him to exalt the standard and pour forth the straight truth. Some will not bear this straight testimony. They will rise up against it, and this is what will cause a shaking among God's people. Early Writings, page 270. In this vision, we are introduced to a mighty message that is to be carried to the Laodiceans, and that is to commence the shaking among God's people. it says, commenced the shaking among God's people. Then in subsequent vision and testimony, we are given to see the glorious sequel to this shaking. Mighty miracles were wrought. The sick were healed, and signs and wonders followed the believers. God was in the work, and every saint, fearless of consequences, followed the conviction of his own conscience, and united with those who were keeping all the commandments of God, and with power they sounded abroad the third message. I would like to read Old Symbolic Code, then go back to Desire of Ages. So let's read the statement here. Old Symbolic Code. 1 Symbolic Code, number 17, page 3. 1 Symbolic Code, number 17, page 3. Indeed, this glorious message is causing a shaking among God's people. Early Writings, page 270. And though many will arise against it, the honest in heart will receive it and cause them to exalt the standard in their own lives and lift it up for others to behold. Hence, the shaking will go on until the closing work for the church, the sealing of the 144,000, is finished, when angels' hands shall remove all things that offend, leaving God's church pure and spotless. It says, we find that many in our ranks long for the experience which all who are left in the land will have. 1 Symbolic Code, number 17, page 3. So that reading declared clearly that such shaking will be during the sealing of the 144,000 living saints. And according to our reading in track number 5, 114 and 115, because of that shaking, the remnant give glory to God, which is the width, which is represent the 144,000. Now let me read to you Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 6. Maybe you can read the whole chapter from verse 1 to verse 13. And accordingly, this vision of Isaiah is on the very year when King Uzziah died, the 10th king of Judah. Isaiah 6, verse 1. Now, I would like to read, brethren, if you will read verse 9 and verse 10, Isaiah 6, verse 9 and verse 10, in 2TG, number 11, that is the verse attached by B.T. Hotep in 2TG 11:10, 2TG number 11, page 10. At the times when new truths had been introduced, millions have lost out only because they were too well satisfied with what they had. Not thousands, but millions. They saw need of nothing better, or else they were too proud to accept unpopular truth from one of God's own appointed messengers. Thus it is that when God sends a message, rather than it being to them a step upward toward salvation, it has been and still is to many a step downward toward damnation. To this end was the prophet instructed. Then quoted Isaiah 6, verse 9 and 10. So Isaiah 6, verse 9 and 10 is applied to the time when the new truths had been unfolded, and that unfolding of the scriptures, instead of a step toward salvation to many, millions lose out. It become a step downward to damnation. Now let us read verse 12 and verse 13 in Isaiah chapter 6. So let us read, brothers and sisters. It says, and the Lord have removed men far away, and there be a great forsaking in the midst of the land. But yet in it shall be a tent, and it shall return, and shall be eaten, as a teal tree, and as an oak, whose substance is in them. When they cast their leaves, so the holy seed shall be the substance thereof. Would you think the tent mentioned here has no connection with the tent in Revelation 11, verse 13? Now let us read track number 9, quoting Isaiah 19, verse 24. Isaiah 19, verse 24, and also Isaiah 24, verse 14. This purified class, who stands steadfast during the shaking. Brothers and sisters, the shaking mentioned here is illustrated by great earthquake. There is a great earthquake shaking. And only those who stand steadfast during the shaking in the midst of the land. The church, Isaiah 19 verse 24. In Revelation 11 verse 13, what does the church represented? City. In the city. So let's go back again to track number 5. Track number 5, page 112 and 113. It says, accordingly, in the present connection, the remnant, 112, track number 5. Accordingly, in the present connection, the remnant is necessarily figurative of the righteous, the width. We already read, right? 1 SR 228, the 144,000. In that part of the city which fell. What part of the city which fell? And what is the entire city? It says, this makes the 7,000 slain figurative of the unrighteous, the tares therein. Hence, the 10th part stand for the church which is first purified. The same with Isaiah 6 verse 13, right? The same with Isaiah 19 verse 24. It says, in which the bad, the tares, are separated from the good, the width. Obviously, therefore, the rest of the city is in this instance a representation of the rest of the Christian world, Christendom as a whole. But 100%, no one would disagree that the only church that God called it the city, it must be pointing to the Sabbath keepers. Sunday keepers never been called the city. So to repeat again, it is pointing to the entire Sabbath keepers throughout the whole world. But more particularly, those under the banner of the third angel's message, because it is answered in Isaiah 19:24. The church, definite article, the church. Now let us read. This purified class who stands steadfast during the shaking, we already read, right? 1 Symbolic Code 17, page 3. The shaking is during the sealing of the 144,000. There is a mighty message by which through that mighty message, there must be great earthquake, which is the shaking. This purified glass who stands steadfast during the shaking in the midst of the land, the church, Isaiah 19 verse 24, is also brought into focus in Isaiah's prophecy on chapter 24 verse 14. They shall sing for the majesty of the Lord's, whereas in verse 16 is projected a subsequent purified class who are gathered from the uttermost part of the earth, and from whom are heard songs, even glory to the righteous. The shaking, in other words, gathers first and second fruits of saints. The one from the church in the midst of the land. The one from the church, the midst of the land, and the other from the world, the uttermost part of the earth. So the midst of the land is pointing to the church, the entire Christendom, the entire Sabbath keepers under the banner of the third angel's message. Thus we see plainly that the redeemed from the church, the servants of God, the firstfruits or firstborn, the biblical term for the priesthood or the ministry, stand firmly during the shaking in the midst of the land, with the result that they carry the truth to all nations during the shaking in the world, thereby taking salvation to many. These two classes of the living are necessarily, therefore, the only redeemed who are left after the shaking. They are spared, delivered from the destruction, because their names are found written in the book. Why is it that they remain steadfast, not been shaken? Because their names are found, left written in the Lamb's book of life. Now let us go back to Desire of Ages. Desire of Ages, page 780. Let's read. An earthquake marked the hour when Christ laid down his life, and another earthquake witnessed the moment when he took it up. in triumph. So there are two earthquakes. The earthquake when he died, the earthquake when Jesus Christ was resurrected. The earthquake on April 16, 31 AD, and the earthquake on April 18, 31 AD. So let's read again. An earthquake marked the hour when Christ laid down his life. That is in Matthew 27. We read already, right? From verse 50 to verse 54. But verse 54 is the earthquake when Jesus Christ was resurrected. An earthquake marked the hour when Christ laid down his life, and another earthquake witnessed the moment when he took it up in triumph. He who had vanquished death and the grave came forth from the tomb with the tread of a conqueror, amid the reeling of the earth, the flashing of lightning, and the roaring of thunder. When he shall come to the earth again, he will shake not the earth only, but also heaven. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard, and shall be removed like a cottage. The heavens shall be ruled together as a scroll. The elements shall melt with his fervent heat. The earth also, and the works that are therein, shall be burned up. But the Lord will be hope of his people, and the strength of the children of Israel. Hebrews chapter 12 verse 26. Isaiah 24 verse 20. Isaiah 34 verse 4. 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 10. Joel 3 verse 16. Isaiah 24 verse 20. 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 10, pointing to the second visible coming of Jesus Christ. But as far as the shepherd's rod is thus concerned, Isaiah 34 verse 4, Joel 3 verse 16, and Hebrews 12 verse 26 is not referring to the second visible coming of Jesus Christ. So there might be possibility that the two earthquakes here in the occurrence on the first advent of Jesus Christ, the earthquake when he died and the earthquake when he was resurrected, is also pointing to two different events. The earthquake in Christ's visible coming and the earthquake in Christ's visible coming. But we focus our attention to the earthquake mentioned in Joel 3 verse 16 and Hebrews 12 verse 26 and also Isaiah 34 verse 4. Now here's another statement that I would like to read, brothers and sisters, in this subject. And to repeat again, Amos 1 verse 1 and 2, Micah 7 verse 14 and 15. It is not just a simple subject by which, brothers and sisters, we just immediately say that establish headquarters in Exeter and then name it Bashan. One of the signs that such occurrence is providential occurrence cometh from God is that the same with the experience of B.T. Hotep, that when they called their headquarters Mount Carmel, he has no idea. He did not know that that name is found in the Bible. That is inspiration. And that providence and that occurrence cometh from God. But it is in actuality opposite to that headquarters that was established in Exeter. Because the founder of that movement, he is already familiar with Micah 7, 14 and 15. And when B.T. Hotep died, then established headquarters there and called it Bashan because they already read Bashan in verse 14. The same with the Sunday keepers. When they read Church of God, then they establish the church and then name it Church of God because they read Church of God. And that is one of the positive proofs that such occurrence is not of God. It is opposite to the occurrence of B.T. Hotep. When they named their reading materials Shepherd's Rod, B.T. Hotep has no knowledge concerning Micah 6 verse 9. They discovered it after naming the publication Shepherd's Rod. When they arrived in Waco, Texas, they named their headquarters Mount Carmel, and they have no knowledge. But after naming the headquarters, God inspired his servant to let him know that such name is recorded in the Bible. That is inspiration. But opposite to the movements which is named by the mouth of men. They named that headquarters because they read in the Bible or in the Spirit prophecy, and that's what it means wholesale deception in Isaiah 4. What they are after is the name. B.T. Hotep is not after the name. But the fact is that when he named such headquarters Mount Carmel, he did not even know that it is found in the Bible. Here in 1TG 42 page 4, 1TG 42 page 4, as you know, there are now hundreds of church names in the world. As many names as there are isms, all of which are named by the mouth of men. That is named by the mouth of men. Although God recognizes but one church, many of the names even suggest divine competition. For instance, do not names the Church of Christ and Church of God make Christ and God competitors? You see, brothers and sisters? And it says, we are now living in a confused world. Some are of Paul and some of Apollos, of Cephas, Peter, John, and James. Some of God and some of Christ. Christians are thus bickering and quarreling among themselves, one speaking against the faith of another, and at the same time, all are trying to convert to Christ the non-Christian world. What darkness to the church which God is now creating, he says. 1TG 42 page 4 and 5. And that statement is even more definitely applied in our days. What a confused world. And the name recorded in the Bible and in the Shepherd's Rod, both of them are Davidians, but they were not agreeing each other. Look at, there is a name, the branch, and their basis is the writings of B.T. Hotep. And another name, their movement Bayesian, and their basis is the writings of B.T. Hotep. Mount Carmel. What they are after is the name. That is the only thing important to them, is the name. They were not after the present truth. And the fact is that such names are making competitors. It seems that there is a divine competition, brothers and sisters. So, I would like to go back to our subject. Our subject, to repeat again, is concerning the earthquake. Now, I would like to read to you another statement in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 4, 446. I would like to read this reading. It says, the attention of the people must be arrested. Volume 4, 446. The attention of the people must be arrested. Our message is a savor of life unto life or death unto death. The destinies of souls are balancing. Multitudes are in the valley of decision. Where you could find that statement, in the valley of decision, brothers and sisters. That is in Joel chapter 3, verse 1 and verse 2. Now it says here, the destinies of souls are balancing. Multitude are in the valley of decision. A voice should be heard crying, if the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 4, page 446. But I think it is even more easier to convince people in the days of Elijah of old, ancient Elijah, than in our days. Because they did not deny that they were prophets of Baal. They did not deny that they were priests of Baal. But unlike in our days, everybody claimed, brothers and sisters, that they are the true movement. Nobody claimed that they were prophets of Baal. Nobody claimed that they were priests of Baal. And in the days of Elijah, it is even more easier to recognize that there was drought because it was literal. But in a spiritual aspect, it is very hard. Brothers and sisters, it is very hard. Even Sunday keepers, they will not acknowledge that their movement were destitute of the dew from heaven. But the reality, brothers and sisters, as long as the present truth is no longer in our borders, then we are in a spiritual drought. So it's very important to study closely the prophecy along with the history. I would like to read again that statement. Let us read. Written by Alonzo Jones. It says, history is the only true commentary on the prophecies, and the only true exposition of the prophecies is to set down together the history and the prophecy, because history, as it really is but the complement of prophecy as it is written. So, that is pointing to typological prophecy. Amos 1 verse 1 and 2 is typological prophecy. So the only thing that you can rest assured that your interpretation in Amos chapter 1, verse 1 and 2 is correct if it will harmonize with the history. If our interpretation contradicts the picture, then it is erroneous. It is the shepherd's rod who declared it, brothers and sisters. In 1 SR 226, it says, the types themselves are not the true object, no more than a photograph is, but it is a representation which pictures an unmistakable evidence, the object in view. So we need to look at the picture, how Mount Carmel of old had been withered. So that is the only way, brothers and sisters, that we could understand. The withering of Mount Carmel is gradual, but within 3.5 years. Now let us read again, Prophets and Kings 144. Let us not close our eyes, brethren. That is why B.T. Hotel says, lest we shall be condemned on that memorable day. That is pointing to the prophecy in Amos 1, verse 1 and 2. That statement, if we are honest, should awaken our senses. Now let us read one symbolic code. Number 13, pages 1 and 2. It says, if Mount Carmel Center is to be true to its name and stand as an antitype of that ancient hill to which God called His people of old to prove who was the true God, then we, who are so highly privileged as to be among those chosen to pioneer this march up the mountain, must be very sure that we can do more than just say, the Lord, He is the God. The Lord, He is the God. Lest we fall under the condemnation of the false prophets who were slain at the close of that memorable day when Elijah met the prophets of Baal on the ancient mount bearing the same name we have chosen, where we are now to be tested as to whether we'll follow God or Baal. Now this is the serious question and sincere question, brothers and sisters. When does Elijah of old meet the prophets of Baal in Mount Carmel? After the drought, because when God commanded ancient Elijah to proclaim unto them that there would be 3.5 years, that there would be no rain, immediately after Elijah pronounced that sentence, he was disappeared. And immediately, the drought gradually fulfilled, according to Prophets and Kings. So the statement here in 144, before the drought, Mount Carmel had been a place of beauty. Its streams feed from never-failing springs. So that is the reality. Mount Carmel is a place of beauty. So the antitype is the same. When antitypical Elijah, John the Baptist, was still in that place from 1935 to 1955, Mount Carmel, antitypical Mount Carmel, is a beautiful place spiritually, not literally. Although in the type it is literally, but in the antitype it must be figurative. So through the types, brothers and sisters, we can easily see that from the time when B.T. Hotep disappeared in 1955, gradually, brothers and sisters, the truth became exhausted. There is no more present truth. And that is why B.T. Hotep says, type and antitypes meet, but in the antitype, we are worse than in the days of Elijah. Because the people recognize the fact that there was drought, because it is literal. But in spiritual aspect, it is very hard. The people still pretentiously, brothers and sisters, denying the absolute fact that there was no more present truth. So this prophecy that we'll be studying, I would like to prove to you that the earthquake mentioned there, 2 years from this year, then that earthquake, which is pointing to both events, literal and symbolical. The literal earthquake, that is that earthquake to resurrect those who died under the third angel's message since 1844. And that is the reason why Sister White connect the earthquake on the first advent, and then connect Joel 3:16, connect Hebrews 12:26, connect Isaiah 34. There are two earthquakes there. The earthquake when Jesus Christ died, and the earthquake when Jesus Christ was resurrected. But it is more broader in the antitype, because there is an earthquake which is still probationary time, and that is during the sealing of the 144,000, and that earthquake is shaking, meaning the Sabbath keepers will be shaken with that mighty message, brothers and sisters, and we will show to you how that shaking will affect the whole world. You remember our reading that in Mount Sinai, what is Mount Sinai? In 1SR page 100, it points out to the reorganization when God's power had been manifested. And Hotep himself declared clearly, brethren, that when God will begin to manifest His power, the whole world will feel the effects of it. I would like to read that reading. In 1TG 34, page 11, it says, this verse shows that while the pronouncement of woe on verse 1 is being made, at the same time, a deep-rooted reformation is taking place among God's truth-seeking people, hoping that we are among God's truth-seeking people. They are praying not for themselves alone, but for their brethren also. They fully realize that they are approaching the time of trouble, and their hope lies the fact that they have waited for the Lord. God's power shall be felt throughout the earth. This verse reveals that when God manifests His power among His people, the world will feel the effects of it. The world will feel the effects of it. And that would be our next subject on our next episode, to completely decipher and make a detailed explanation concerning the earthquake in Amos 1, verse 1, Joel 3:16, Zechariah 14, verse 5, which is also connected to the war that will be fought in the Middle East or in the Promised Land, brothers and sisters. Here's another statement in 1TG 34, page 16. It says, when God manifests His power among His people, even the world will feel the effects of it. Even the world, they will feel the effects of it, brothers and sisters. So, in 1TG 32:23, it says, God is about to thus manifest His power and vindicate His cause. The days of His silence are almost past. 1TG 32:23. And that predicted event will be fulfilled in 2021. In 2021, brothers and sisters. And that is the time that you could remember what we are saying. So here in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 1, 184, it was quoted Joel 3:16, Hebrews 12:26, and Revelation 16:17. So, we need to study closely these, brothers and sisters. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 1, page 184. So, we will continue this subject on our next episode, and hoping that God would bless us. It is a little bit deep study. Amos chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. Connection Zechariah 14, verses 1 to 5. And Joel 3, if possible, from verse 1 to verse 16. And also Isaiah 6, then Isaiah 7, Isaiah 8, and Isaiah 19, verse 24. So, hoping that the good Lord will bless us and would help us, brothers and sisters. Thank you very much for listening and viewing this program. May the good Lord bless you and have a beautiful and wonderful evening.